Hi, I'm Dr. Jenny French. I coach school leaders and am also an adolescent literacy expert. And in this session, we're going to be looking at the science of reading and what that means for grades 6 through 12, primarily middle school, 6 through 8. We're also going to look at some informal reading assessments and what that might look like in content area classrooms and some misconceptions about teaching reading at the secondary level. We'll talk about key features of what it's like to teach reading to adolescents and how their brain organizes and processes that information and what the literacy demands are across the content areas in grades 6 through 12. Let's start by looking at some national data. According to last year's NAEP data, the National Assessment for Educational Progress, and that assessment is really important because it's the only one we have nationwide. According to last year's assessment, only 70% of eighth graders are reading on grade level. And for our minority groups, that percentage is even higher. And last year, there was also a really interesting study done out of California, where in two-parent households where both parents or guardians are college educated, there were still 49% of students not reading on grade level. Let's clarify the language. So the language the NAEP uses is below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced. This is the eighth grade data. So you can see we have the smallest percent of advanced or above grade level readers. We have 29% of students reading on grade level. And then the basic and below basic categories are either below grade level or significantly below grade level. That red bar of below grade level requires significant intervention or tiered remediation. Here's the 12th grade data, and you can see that it's very similar, but we have even fewer students reading at the advanced level, but more in that basic category. And then here's our fourth grade data, with almost 40% of students being significantly below grade level and needing intensive intervention. So this really is going to frame up our conversation about how all teachers have to be literacy teachers. You may be familiar with this tiered pyramid of instruction. So this model is really important because as school leaders, we make a lot of our decisions based on this model. It shows us the tiered levels of instruction. So tier 1, our core instruction or our first time instruction, 80% of our students should be ready to receive core or tier 1 instruction. Tier 2 is for about 15% of our student population. That means they just need that additional support, maybe some more practice time, a little bit slower pacing. And tier 3 should be for 5% or less of our student body. And those are intense interventions and typically one-on-one. This model is important because we use it to make decisions about hiring. We use this based on our student population of how many gen ed teachers we need, how many special education teachers we need to hire, or how many interventionists that we need. Our school logistically can additionally support 20% of our student population. So that can be through special education services, through remediation, through ELL support, but we're at about 20% capacity because that's how we've structured our schools logistically. But if we take a look at our national averages, approximately 20% of the student population are special education students. We have an additional 10% of students that need English language learning support, and then 7% that are gifted and talented. So just doing our general math, this is 37%, which is more than that 20% we can logistically provide for. So that's why we are feeling such a squeeze with this model, because according to the pyramid, we only have the capacity for 20% of students to give them that additional support that they need. But many more students need support than we're giving. In reality, what we have is more of a diamond structure. In reality, about 20% of students are ready for that more independent or core tier 1 instruction, whereas 60% of students need additional support and scaffolding and slower pacing, and closer to 10% need tier 3 intense intervention or one-on-one instruction. So I like to say it this way: we cannot intervene our way out of a tier 1 problem. If 70% of our students need additional literacy support, they will not get it through intervention because we physically don't have the capacity to support them. So the focus has to come on tier 1 instruction across the content areas. And that's really when we start to see school improvement or school achievement begin to tip, not only when they get good reading instruction, but when their literacy practices are also in the content area. That's when you start to see the achievement gaps close at the secondary level. So for tier 1 instruction, ideally, you have a curriculum that you're working with, has vertical alignment or aligns closely to the standards, and it covers topics in depth and breadth, and you have access to quality resources. Many times as secondary content area teachers, we're creating our own curriculum, and sometimes that can be piecemeal or there's lack of quality control there. So it's important that you have this backup information of how to support your students who are not reading on grade level, how you can support them in your content area classrooms. So in your classroom, the students sitting in front of you, approximately 70% of those students will not be able to access the grade level text you put in front of them. So you have to be armed and equipped with some strategies and skills to be able to help those students access that text. So regardless of the grade you teach or the subject area, you are a literacy teacher. And if that gives you anxiety, that's why we're doing these modules, to help you feel ready. So I want to look at a couple of quotes. Linda Darling Hammond says this: "The single most important determinant of success for students is the knowledge and skills of that child's teacher." And so as you are coming in to teaching students, they are going to rely on your ability to help them access text. They are not going to have the skills to be able to do so. So you have to help bridge the text that they need and their reading level. And then also, teachers who accept and support the necessity for teaching language explicitly are also more receptive to PD, support from reading coaches, and their students are more likely to have academic success. In other words, no one expects you to be a reading expert. They only expect that you have an open mind, engage in any coaching and training that's available. And if you're aware of the importance that language and reading and literacy have within your content area, and you put that at the forefront of your instruction, your students will succeed academically. So let's talk about the adolescent reading brain. And this may be a review for you or a bit of a refresher, but that's okay. We want to look specifically in regards to how their brain processes reading and reading instruction. Adolescence, which is that period between typically 10 years of age to 19, really the onset of puberty. And if you remember the prefrontal cortex, which is in the front of our brain, this is really the CEO of our brain. So it is responsible for decision making and problem solving, future planning, those types of things. This is the last part of our brain to fully develop. And in most males, it's not quite fully developed until the age of 25. For females, a little bit sooner, but still early 20s. And I love the analogy. It's like giving a teenager a high-powered sports car while the brakes are malfunctioning. And this is a really great metaphor for adolescents in general. They are very sensitive because of their limbic system. They're highly sensitive to emotions and the reward processing center. And so they can make decisions typically based on more feelings versus rational, logical decision making. And this is why it's key to create a really safe and positive school environment. This is also the time in the brain where you can start thinking more abstractly versus concrete. Think about moving from more concrete math into algebraic equations and things that are more conceptual. They are really motivated by peers, and peer acceptance is one of their top priorities, but they're also developing autonomy. So student choice is important, and peer collaboration. Now, not necessarily tightly related to reading, but I think this is one of the most helpful things for me as a middle school teacher that I used with my students, with my teachers who I coached, and with my own children as well. So this is called the event response outcome equation. This is just a helpful visual so that students can see that their response in a situation is critical. So an event happens, they get an F on a paper, they respond. They throw their device, they flip a desk, they internally criticize themselves, whatever that response might be, equals the outcome. So often, adolescents miss this response part. They just see the event to the outcome. So by showing them this visual, either writing it on a piece of paper, having a graphic organizer as an anchor chart in your classroom, but bringing it to their attention of what their part is in this whole process is really crucial, because they do not see it. It is a blind spot. They see it as a button was pushed and an explosion happens. Training them and helping them to see that there's a space between an event, between an outcome, there is a space, and that they are in control of that space. And what they do will dictate what the outcome is. So just consider this a bonus track. Looking more specifically at adolescents and comparing that to elementary intervention, middle school and high school students need 2 to 3 times as much intervention as elementary students do, because they're not only learning, but they have to unlearn or undo the incorrect coping mechanisms that they have currently of how they're learning to read, whether it's relying on context clues or they are saying spelling rules differently that are inaccurate. They have to unlearn those things and then learn the right explicit systematic phonics instruction. So it takes a long time. More specifically, it can take over 100 hours of intense reading instruction to get students on track. And those are the students that are missing some key gaps in their phonics. This isn't referring to students that are just 1 or 2 grade levels below and need just some additional comprehension support. We're talking about students that have significant deficits in their foundational skills. They have some serious gaps. Ideally, if we're doing intervention at middle school or high school, this is going to be in a block schedule or at least 2 periods a day. One of the things that really characterizes adolescents is a big personality. They have a lot of big feelings and emotions, and their brain it's not finished processing. So while they may be able to make good decisions or good judgment calls or rein in those emotions, it's not going to be done on a consistent basis because the prefrontal cortex isn't developed yet. So I want to take a second and just read through a few of these and ask you to try to make a connection and think about a time maybe where you have experienced this. Negative emotions like shame and anxiety can reduce working memory capacity up to 30%, impairing a student's ability to process new information. So think about that, or think about a time when maybe you were emotional, maybe it wasn't school related and you just brought some emotional baggage into a learning space and you could not focus. It impairs your ability to process new information. That's why if you're having an emotional issue happening or going through a crisis, it's very difficult to make a decision because your emotions work in the back of your brain, but your prefrontal cortex and all of your decision making is in the front. So all of your energy, all of the juice is going to the back of your brain and to your body having this physical response, and it can't go to the problem solving space. So you'll have like no retention, little understanding, and absolutely no retention. The next quote, students who feel incompetent or embarrassed in class often disengage cognitively and emotionally, leading to decreased academic performance and long-term motivation. Emotions are not separate from cognition. They are a foundation for it. A student who feels ashamed or anxious literally has less cognitive bandwidth available to think and learn. So think about so many of your students that will be coming into class. They might not feel good about themselves. They might have overheard something in the hallway that's triggering them. They may feel excluded from a social group, even within the classroom. There's so much happening socioculturally that students are internalizing and reacting to that you might not even be aware of that will impact or their learning. When students believe they are not smart or don't belong, their academic performance suffers. But when schools intentionally build belonging and confidence, student achievement increases. So you've heard it before, but relationships with your student really is the foundation for their learning. Making sure they feel safe and welcomed in your environment is crucial. And then the last quote, you literally can't think well when you feel dumb. Anxiety and shame shrinks your brain's learning center. Building confidence is not fluff, it's science-backed and essential to learning. So let's shift our conversation now to some scientific reading models. Ooh, sounds fun. This is Scarborough's reading rope, and this has been around since 2001. So if you've heard the term the science of reading, and there's legislation now in almost every state, this is really one of the cornerstone reading models that is part of that legislation and a huge cornerstone in the body of research about the science of reading. And when we say the science of reading, it's not really a fad or a thing. We're referring to the body of research of the last 50 years that says what works when teaching reading and how the brain best learns reading and comprehends what they're reading and then retains that information. So really it's all the science and all the research studies that have went into that. What's important and unique about this model is that you see where the rope comes together on the right side and all those threads are braided in. The right side, it depicts reading comprehension as one thing. And a lot of times this is a myth, but we understand reading comprehension as a thing. We teach reading comprehension. We test reading comprehension, but that's not accurate. So how Scarborough's reading rope breaks it down for us is everything over here on the left side are all the components that are happening simultaneously in your brain when you read. And if you look at the bottom 3 threads, this equals a strand called word recognition. And so of those word recognition strand, those threads are phonological awareness, which really just means attaching a letter to a sound, decoding, which also encompasses encoding, which is spelling, so sounding out words and then being able to write those sounds. And then sight recognition, so seeing a word and knowing what that word is automatically. These word recognition skills are taught in grades kindergarten through 2nd. So that means all of the curriculum is designed for 5 to 7-year-olds. So if we move up the strand to the next part of those threads, we'll see literacy knowledge, which is all about print and understanding how things, text features, how they work on a page. The next thread is verbal reasoning. That really goes to inferencing, figurative language, everything between the lines that we're reading, the meaning that's coming from the text that is not literal. Language structure has to do with syntax and semantics, so the way the sentence is formed and the word choice, vocabulary, and background knowledge. So those are what we focus on when we're teaching reading or language arts in grades 3 through adult. Where we're finding ourselves now with that 70% of students not reading on grade level is that when you're teaching secondary, you have many students in your class sitting in front of you that have not mastered those word recognition skills. They are still struggling with decoding, with spelling, even with sound symbol correspondence or sight words. These are the students that will need that 20%, that intervention, that extra scaffolding. They're not going to get what they need in tier 1 instruction. However, there are things that you can do as a content area teacher that will help support those students in accessing your text, the text that you provide them. And that's really what these modules are about. It's about helping you to help your students to read that content area when they don't have the skills to do it independently. The next model that's important is called the simple view of reading. So it takes those 2 strands and it breaks them up into a multiplication equation. And what's important about this is that it signifies a strength in one area can't overcompensate for a weakness in the other. We have to have both. For example, I'll use my son. He has dyslexia. I would give him a 0 in decoding, but I would give him a 1 in language comprehension because he's got good background knowledge and great vocabulary. Well, 0 times 1 is still 0. So that is going to impact reading comprehension. Vice versa. You might be able to decode really well, but not have the background knowledge or the understanding or the vocabulary to interact with this text. That will impact the comprehension still being 0. You have to have both. This is also important with assessment. So typically, especially at the secondary level, we have students test their reading comprehension and we're given a score. And usually that score is similar to the NAEP, maybe different language, but it will break students down into being grade level, on grade level, above grade level, below grade level. And then how we usually do school intervention is we take those students who are below grade level and really below grade level, and we group them, and then we really hammer in language comprehension strategies, because at the secondary level, that's what we know. And that's typically what students need. But in reality, that's not the case. And we'll intervene with students and provide remediation, and then we will see little to no growth because we're not actually diagnosing where their deficit is. For many of those students, they could be lacking word recognition skills, those decoding and phonics skills. So we have to group our students or assess our students with an assessment that will decouple those two strands. So if we have students that are scoring at the bottom of 20% of the class, these are students that we really need to identify and look at assessing in phonological awareness and decoding. So I want to share a few assessment resources with you. Understandably, you most likely will not be the one responsible for these assessments. But at the secondary level, there's such a dearth of knowledge. I just want you to be prepared and have this information in your back pocket. All of these assessments are free and can be found online and have little to no training, and it gives you the directions for how to implement and how to score them. These tests are from DIBELS, DIBELS. Again, found free online. The oral reading fluency test is just what it says. So this is an 8th grade example. Students just read it out loud, and it says the number on the side of how many words are in that sentence. You literally mark out any word that students get incorrect. And so this is an accuracy. The next test is called a nonsense word fluency. Students really have to rely on their decoding skills, and they can't rely on pictures or context clues. So it really drills down and shines a light on their ability to decode words. So if you have a student who's scoring really poorly, and when they read out loud, struggling at the individual word level, then this is something you can pull up, ask them to read aloud to you. You don't have to be a reading specialist to be able to diagnose this. It's a good piece of data that you can share with your team, and it just gives you more insight of how you can help your student. This is a look at the maze comprehension test, again from DIBELS. Every 7th word, students have a choice. So it's about selecting the correct word for the context. So where the others were really looking at phonological awareness, this is about word choice and comprehension. Past, or the phonological awareness screening test, also free online, Dr. Kilpatrick's work. And this is one that we will practice together. I will ask you to try out. It breaks down step-by-step instructions and scoring within each activity, and starts at preschool and goes up through adulthood. These kind of activities, you'll see it's really just about manipulating sounds in a word and a student's ability to do that. Because if they can manipulate the sounds in a word or parts of a word, they have strong word structure, they're probably better reader. If all else fails, just have students read aloud, one-on-one with you. Listen to students read aloud and then ask them to tell you what they read. It's called a retell, or ask them to summarize. Summarize has harder skills in it, so just a retell is fine. Even if you're not a reading expert, you can hear a student read out loud and you can see where their struggle is. If they're at the word level, decoding inaccurately, saying the wrong word, maybe they're saying crash instead of crush, then they most likely need help with decoding if this is a consistent behavior, if they just miss one word. If they're reading choppy or monotone, that gives you insight that they just need fluency practice. Or maybe they can read, and decode beautifully and smoothly and have great prosody, which means their reading sounds like speech, but they can't retell or summarize or answer any questions about what they've read. So it's really just a comprehension issue. Listening to students read aloud will really clue you into what they need. If a student is reading monotone or choppy, so they're disfluent, they are going to miss a lot of underlying tones, author bias, characters' choices, characters' intentions. This assessment is from Arkansas Department of Education, and it's called the Rapid Naming Screener. This can be used to help determine whether it's a reading issue or a cognitive retrieval or processing issue. So how it works is students just say the colors quickly at a good clip from left to right, just like reading. So red, green, blue, yellow, just down the line in rapid succession. If they can't, if you see the struggle is there, then that's a good indication that it's a cognitive issue, not just a reading issue. You can also ask your special education teacher or director if you get into this type of assessment, if you have suspicions that this is an issue. So we're thinking about that 70% of students that are non-readers. They're either not decoding well or they're reading but not understanding. It helps to categorize them so we know how to help them. That first group would be our non-decoders, or to use a metaphor, they're really stuck in the driveway. This is the group of students that need that 20% of intervention. And we won't see progress with these students unless they get that specific systematic instruction. And then there is a list of the assessments that we discuss that can help support or identify those students further. It wouldn't be assessing all of our students. It would just be students that we have suspicions about or that consistent bottom 20% of scores. The middle group of students are our disfluent students. So these are our students that don't read smoothly, they read choppy or monotone. And we can work with these students in our classroom to help them scaffold the text. And we're going to work through strategies of how to support these students specifically. One is repeated readings, and it just makes sense. The more we read something, the more deeply we will understand it. There's also a strategy called scooping that helps with fluency and working with our prosody and pacing. So really the rhythm and naturalness of our reading. And then the last category are the non-comprehenders. So those students that read smoothly, but then can't retell it or did not understand what they were reading. There's a difference between reading a beach novel and reading a chemistry text, and students need to be taught those strategies. And that's really what this last category is about, knowing how to attack a text in order to understand it based on the structure and the type of text that it is. For these students, we really focus on vocabulary, building their background knowledge, and how to deconstruct the text. So in your classroom with those approximately 70% of students that aren't reading on grade level, they're going to fall into one of these categories. So by the end of these modules, I want you to feel comfortable and competent to be able to identify which of your students would fall into these categories, and based on that, how to help them and support them reading your content area text. Students have to be taught to read. Our brain is developed for language, but not for reading. I could take you to Italy and drop you off for 6 months, and you would eventually pick up Italian. I could lock you in a library for 6 months. You are not going to pick up learning how to read. It is a code that has to be taught and explained explicitly. Even though some students might seem like natural readers, but the majority of the population need that code really broken down and explained. This is a recreation or an image of what a brain looks like under an MRI for a struggling reader and a strong reader. So you can see the strong reader has multiple points there, and it really is like this efficient highway system. And that's where the decoding learning comes from, or phonics. So one of those dots is a letter attached to a sound, and a sound attached to a meaning, and a meaning attached to a word, and a word attached to a picture, and all of these different things. And so this context creates this efficient highway system. Conversely, on the struggling reader brain, we see this bright red dot, which is originally developed in the brain for recognizing faces. So this is really about image retrieval and recall. So imagine if I line up 100 people from your past in front of you and ask you to go down the row from left to right and name each person. Pretend you're in that situation and you can feel the struggle, the effort, and the mental energy that takes to recall each name, just like I'm trying to run into somebody at the grocery store and you can't recall their name. So you're working from left to right to do that and try to retrieve those images. A student that's utilizing this part of their brain to do that is really that whole language approach. So I'm seeing a word and how it's shaped and what it looks like, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm recalling it as an image versus each sound, or each letter has a sound, and breaking down the code that way. So a lot of times we'll say students don't have reading stamina. That may be the case, but it also may be the case that they're utilizing the wrong part of their brain when they're trying to decode. So translate that 100 faces to 100 words on the page, going from left to right and trying to recall each word by using that image retrieval. That is laborious and time consuming and difficult, and all of your mental effort is going into the word recognition and not to the meaning of the text. But brains are plastic and can be retrained. It's never too late to develop these new pathways in our brain. That just comes from reading instruction. So as we wrap up, I just want to bring up the Peter effect, which says we can't give to someone something we don't have. You are a content area teacher. You are a master of your content. You're an expert in that area. But many of your students, almost 70%, are not going to be able to access that grade level text. So the goal of this is really to equip you with the information and the skills and the strategies that you need to help your students to be able to access your content text. I hope you found this worthwhile as we laid the foundation for the next few sessions. Always helpful at the end just to take a few notes and jot down what was new information for you, maybe what was most important, and then if you have any action items from this. I'll see you next time.